Hello, my name is Chris Sinclair, and this is my case study for AEP 855. So, to summarize the case, the situation is that the principal at Rocket Junior High is faced with this dilemma of finding that one of his students has a pair of brass knuckles on him. His name is David, but it is found out that they actually belong to another student named James who has somewhat of a troubled past. David does not. David is more of a good kid with honors. And so he has to figure out what to do in this situation in terms of discipline. There's a policy in place that says both students have to be taken to the jail and that they're charged with a felony. And then the school board policy basically demands that both students have to be expelled for 45 days into the district's alternative education program. So the principal also had to write both of them up. And then the problem is that the principal has this moral, ethical dilemma going on where he is trying to figure out how to discipline the students because he doesn't feel like one size fits all in this. James and David should not receive the same punishment for the crime because David was holding them for James and has never had any discipline issues before this. Um, Legal and ethical issues. No one was really harmed by it other than just David being upset and not being used to being in trouble, and that he could be potentially wrongly punished if the policy is followed. Does the action or the situation contravene an existing law? I said yes. If the principal does not fill out the paperwork enforced by the policy, he will be reprimanded. He will get in trouble. Was there a breach of contract? Were the actions discriminatory or constituted harassment? I said no. No one was discriminated or harassed by the school, but David was harassed by James on school grounds, which led to this issue, which is why I think the principal feels this sense of a moral issue here. He feels like David was kind of forced into this by a person who is somewhat known for bullying, and doesn't feel like it's fair that they would receive the same punishment. So, what has happened? I said a general policy at Rocket Junior High was made for the entire student body. It's a zero policy, but an ethical dilemma has developed because the policy has made punishment for one of the students unfair, which happens to be David. What are the relevant known facts of the case? What facts are unknown? I said for the people section involved is the principal. You have James, who is somewhat of the troubled kid who is 15, David, who is 13, who is more of the innocent one or the one that has not been in as much, has not had any discipline issues as an honor student in the band. Um, David's mother is also involved because she is called. So is James's mother. And then the school officer gets involved, as well as the director of secondary education who talks to the principal. This takes place at Rocket Junior High. And then for program, the school's policy is a zero tolerance policy, which demands that both students receive an expulsion for 45 days and are put into the alternative program there at the district. Section 5, prioritizing the info. Could the conflict, the situation, or the decision be damaging to stakeholders? I said it could be to the relationship with James and David and their families. What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? Mostly David and his family is what I feel, because he is the one who we have this sense of there being a ethical issue, and morally we feel like we need to fix this because we don't agree with it. Our moral compass is telling us that if David gets disciplined the same way as James, that it's not fair and that there could be negative consequences from that decision made. Have all the relevant stakeholders been consulted? I feel like the board should be consulted in the decision the principal is making. Can I learn more about the situation? I definitely think so. When was this policy adopted? How long has it been put into place? Who put this policy into place? Is there a discipline board for the school? I know most schools have this. I've been a part of the discipline board for two of the three schools that I've worked for. Um, the students should be offered a hearing through due process. They should be offered a chance to appeal the decision made, and be able to voice their reasonings for what happened, and if there's anything that they feel like the board should know, the discipline board should know. The students should also be questioned again just to make sure their stories match up and that nothing changes, just to make sure that it seems as accurate as possible. Do I know enough to make a decision? I feel like I could make a decision based on this, but I do feel like I would make a better decision if I had more information. Identifying options and consequences. What could I do in this situation? I had three options that I came up with. I said, let the policy control the outcome, meaning it's already in place. It is enforced. Technically, I would hope that the parents have seen this policy before in the student handbook. The principal should have already known that this policy would be in place. So technically, the principal could just let it be what it is. Both students get the same discipline, same outcome, same consequence. Or I could go to the board and fight the policy and say that David does not receive that or does not deserve to receive that same consequence as James, and see if maybe that's something that can be changed. And then also my third option would be find a lesser punishment for David, since he did take the brass knuckles into his possession and he also kept quiet when he was being questioned, which I think are two things that David needs to learn is not okay. Even if it's through a bullying situation, he needs to stand up for himself. So those are my three options. Section 7, evaluate your options. So for that first one, doing nothing, things that I came up with is David could permanently be impacted by the situation, could lead him down a bad path. We hope not, but it could. The situation could happen again. It's not an easy situation for the principal to be in, and if he keeps having to make these kinds of decisions, it could get really sticky, could become an issue in the school where students are doing these things and getting wrong consequences put on them. But if the principal follows it, the principal would have no consequence. If I take it to the board could become upset with the principal, could create a bad relationship between them. The policy could become more lenient in certain situations, so that students could be disciplined more fairly, which is a good thing. The principal would not feel guilt from this. His moral compass would feel like it's right on track where it needs to be. For the third one, finding a lesser punishment for David, it would still have to be taken to the board, I feel, because, again, if you're not following a policy, you should be talking to your board at the school about it, figuring out what we can do about it. So still be taking it to the board. But both students would still receive a punishment for their actions, which is good. And then people could also question if punishments are just, meaning if you are doing different punishments for students who are involved in the same thing, it might seem unfair and it could create some issues among the schools. So just something to kind of be aware of. Section 8, choosing the best option. This requires kind of a final reflection. How can the decision be implemented? Have the stakeholders been consulted? Or have I identified the creative options? So what my decision is to go to the board, ask for the policy to be redone or redesigned, so that I have more of a say as a principal as to how this should be handled. Because even though the students are involved in the same situation, they didn't do the same things. And so I feel like there should be different punishments. I would still talk to David and his mom about the issues that arose from him being in this situation that he shouldn't have been doing. He should not have taken the brass knuckles, or if he felt like he had to, he should have went directly to some kind of superior to let them know what was going on. So I do feel like he should have handled the situation better. He also should have fessed up when he was being questioned instead of sitting there quiet. I get he was scared, but again, these are things that I feel like as educators we should be correcting in students to make them a better person. So I would definitely still punish him, but just to a lesser degree than James. I also feel like, again, the board needs to be involved in the decision making. I know the principal feels wrong about it, but if it were me, I just feel like I would want to work with the team. The board needs to be involved, figure out how this policy didn't work in this situation, and just really try to persuade them to adjust it, as well as being okay with what we do with David. And then that way I can also say that the board backs me up in this decision and it's not just me. Imagine implementing it. I would say when it comes to choose your path, again, talking to the board to get their approval first after the situation has arisen. I'd go to them, talk to them about redesigning. Hopefully they'll be on the same page as myself, getting David a lesser punishment. I still would give both students a chance to have a hearing at this point. I just think that that's fair, and it's a part of due process. Because James has already he already has a record, he would receive a more severe punishment. Whereas I feel like since this is David's first offense, he would have something a little smaller, such as doing community service and working with the school janitor for 1 week after school. Think about what may happen. My hope is that James will continue to improve, because it sounded like he was already starting to get on a good path, and then this happened. So hopefully through discipline and talking with the principal, he will continue to improve after this is all said and done and the consequence has finished. Hopefully David will feel more empowered after his consequence, and will continue to be on the good path that he's on, but also be a stronger person in general from it and be able to stand up for himself a little more. Identify who needs to know. So the school board needs to know about what's going on, the students also involved, as well as the parents. I also thought it'd be important to point out that the handbook should also be updated, just to reflect these changes, and so that parents, again, know in the future how situations like this might be handled. Determine if you can deal on your own with the persons involved. I do not have control over the felony aspect of this. That is something that is not my realm of things, but I do have control over the students in regard to their education and being at the school. But again, with the board's approval on that, I wouldn't just make the decision and do it on my own if it's going against their policies. With warn and don't threaten, I would just make sure both students receive explanation of the discipline policies, and that they understand what would happen next if they get in trouble again. They're both kind of at different levels, so I'd make sure each one knows what happens next depending on what it is that they do. What would I do next if the chosen plan or action doesn't work? Ultimately, I feel like it's my job to follow their rules. I signed up to work for the board. If the board is not on my side of things or doesn't understand what I'm trying to do, I feel like my moral compass would probably lead me elsewhere. I would be led to start applying for other schools and working for another district that is more in line with my style and my way of leading. That is all I have for you. Thank you so much.